Hi, my name is Scott McLean from transmusicmastery.com, and in this video I'm going to explain how the modulation matrix works in Zebra2 and also the general principle of a modulation matrix, which you will encounter in a lot of synthesizers. So right now I've got one of the patches that we've already programmed called Propane. This is a lead patch. And behind here I have just a simple no frills MIDI sequence that's simply playing alternating 16th notes based on A, so A, E, and then G, and then A at the top. So this is an effect. It's not really an A chord. This would be A to E would be an interval of a fifth, and then from A to G would be a seventh, and from A3 to A4 would be an octave. So here's how this sounds. Okay, so nothing really special, but I'm going to use this patch to demonstrate how the modulation matrix works. And what I want to do is demonstrate a very common modulation routing that you might set up in your patches. And basically, let's say we wanted to have the cutoff frequency be modulated by the MIDI note velocity right here, or in other words, how hard you hit the keyboard. So if you hit the keyboard hard, then the cutoff frequency would be higher than if you hit it soft, okay? And in effect, the harder you hit the note, the brighter it would sound. And the softer you hit the note, the duller it would sound. Okay, or the warmer it would sound. All right, well, we can use the modulation knobs on the filter itself, which you've seen being done a lot in the course already. But for this video, I'm going to use the modulation matrix. So if we assume that these were already in use and for some reason we need to do this with the modulation matrix, this is how we would do it. Basically, if you look at the modulation matrix, it consists of 12 different slots, okay? So each one of these groupings of two knobs, the mod, via, and target here, would be considered one modulation slot, okay? And you'll hear that terminology used when describing modulation matrices in general. So the target is what you want to modulate, okay? So in this case, I want to modulate the cutoff frequency. So I would just come in here, click on this, and set it to filter, cutoff, okay? And now this slot is being used to modulate the filter cutoff frequency. I will explain what VIA does in a moment, but first we want to look at mod. And the mod is what will be the source or the modulation source that will be modulating the filter cutoff frequency. Okay, so in this case I want it to be the velocity, so I'm going to click that and select velocity from this list. You'll see in this list we've got mod wheel, pitch wheel, breath, LFO, key follow. Pretty much anything that could act as a modulation source for this patch is in this list. And velocity is right here, so I'll select that. And you'll notice this control can go either positive or negative. That allows us to either provide a negative or positive modulation to the target. And in this case, I want it to get brighter, so let's put the cutoff down a little bit. And let me clear that, and let's just play the clip for a second. Okay, and I'm going to increase this about halfway. All right, I'll come back to this in a moment, but let's just go with halfway. And what that means now is that velocity will have some effect on the filter cutoff frequency. So let me move this out of the way. If you look at this MIDI clip, each of these notes has a slightly increasing velocity. Okay, so that the idea would be these notes will start off rather warm, and then as they get to the end of the sequence, because the velocity is higher, they will sound brighter. So let's check that out. And that's because of this modulation routing that I have configured here. So if I bring the velocity down to 0 again, and now I will demonstrate the other direction, which will actually subtract from the cutoff. So now what should happen is the higher the velocity, the duller it will sound. It will actually subtract from the cutoff frequency more than these notes down here. So let me bring this up a bit. In fact, before I do that, let me just get it at a higher value. And so now we'll go ahead and demonstrate the negative modulation. Okay, so there at the end, what I did was I brought cutoff all the way up so that it starts at the highest value, but then it's affected by the velocity. So if I have velocity at full negative and maximum cutoff frequency on the filter, then my lowest note velocities will have the brightest sound, and my highest note velocities will end up having the warmest or dullest sound. Okay, so that pretty much explains the basic idea with the modulator knob, the mod knob, and the target. Now, this mod is known as the primary modulator, and the via is known as the secondary modulator. And these work together so that if I wanted velocity, let's say, to affect cutoff, but then I wanted a secondary modulation source to also affect the degree to which the velocity affects the cutoff, then I can use this via. And the way I'm going to demonstrate that is by adding a modulation by the mod wheel, and I'll just put it in the positive direction here. And what this will do is basically means that the higher the mod wheel setting on the keyboard, the more this velocity is allowed to affect the cutoff. If my mod wheel is at the minimum value, which it is right now, I have it actually rolled back all the way, then my modulation by the velocity will pretty much be non-existent, okay? So let's check that. In fact, I'm going to lower the cutoff frequency about halfway. So you'll notice that we did sound to me like we had some increase in the cutoff frequency as we had the higher note velocities. So I'm going to increase this via to 100%, which means now in order for us to get the full modulation effect that we have dialed in here for the mod value from the velocity to the cutoff, we have to have our mod wheel at its maximum value. So let's check that now. And again, my mod wheel is at 0 position, or at its minimum position. I have not increased it. I'll do that in a moment. Okay, so with the via setting at 100, then the mod wheel is pretty much controlling how much of this velocity reaches the target. And right now, because my mod wheel is at its minimum value, none of the velocity is being used to modulate the cutoff frequency. It's not allowing any of it through. So now what I will do is play the sequence and slowly increase the mod wheel on my keyboard. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay, so I brought it up to the maximum value and then brought it about halfway down and then brought it up to maximum again. And so right now the mod wheel is at its maximum value on my keyboard. Okay, so let me move this out of the way and just play through that, and you'll hear that now the velocity is being allowed, all of this velocity is being allowed to modulate the filter cutoff frequency. Now you might be wondering, well, is the mod wheel modulating the filter cutoff frequency? So let's lower the velocity setting to 0 now, so none of the velocity for the modulation will affect the filter cutoff frequency because our modulation amount for velocity here is set to 0. So let's see if the mod wheel has any effect. Okay, and it doesn't because I had the mod wheel set all the way to maximum and I moved it back and forth between minimum and maximum, and there was no effect on the filter cutoff frequency. All right, so the via doesn't directly affect the target. It just affects how much of the mod source, this primary modulation source, can modulate the target. Okay, so let's say we wanted the mod wheel to modulate the cutoff frequency. Well, we could select filter cutoff again and set it to mod wheel and leave via blank. And so now my mod wheel will directly affect the cutoff, and we still have velocity at 0, so these velocity values in the clip, those are having no effect on the cutoff frequency. So this is all due to the modulation wheel movement. So I'm going to start it at minimum and then increase it slowly to the maximum. Okay, so that's just a couple examples of how the modulation matrix works. Another example might be if we wanted to modulate the envelope. Let's say our filter was modulated by an envelope. So envelope 2 would modulate the filter cutoff frequency. Let me just set that up real quick, something like this. And let me clear these. So now this sounds like this. And we could say, well, let's have the velocity modulate. In fact, let me clear the via because I'm not going to use it for this example. Let's say we wanted velocity to modulate the envelope 2 sustain. And that would cause the filter cutoff frequency to sustain at a higher value. Well, we could select the target as ENV2 sustain. And now let me move this out of the way, and you might have heard it as the sequence played. It got really bright for these last few notes. So let me play through it. And that's a result of having the velocity modulate the envelope to sustain, so that at the higher velocity values, sustain is set to a correspondingly higher value, which ends up sounding like, I can manually demonstrate it here. So assuming we had no modulation whatsoever defined in the modulation matrix, what I just did basically moved the sustain up as the velocity increased. So let me see if I can time this right to demonstrate the same concept, the same sound. So that's the basic idea. So that pretty much wraps up the modulation matrix. You'll see these modulation matrices used or provided by many different synthesizers, and it's all the same similar concept. You basically have a target that you want to modulate and then a source, and then sometimes they provide secondary modulators like Zebra2 does with this via concept. So that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next video.